everyone, and welcome to School to Startup, a series where we explore how educators and researchers are shaping the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs. Joining me today is Professor Allan O'Connor, Professor in Enterprise Dynamics at the University of South Australia. He leads the Bachelor of Business Innovation and Entrepreneurship program and has been recognized by the Australian newspaper as the leading researcher in entrepreneurship and innovation for 3 consecutive years. Professor O'Connor, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Tanushi. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So let's start with your own story. What drew you first in the world of entrepreneurship education and research, and how did it go in the journey in academia?
Oh, that is I can give you a very long answer, but I'll try and make it short. There's a couple of pieces which are important to that backstory to this. First of all, I dropped out of high school, so I didn't actually finish high school. I had no undergraduate degree. So that's the first 2 pieces. So I ended up through a series of things in music. I was labouring in the steelworks. I was doing a number of things before I decided to actually go into education and learn something. So I started out in mechanical engineering and did that at a vocational level. So vocational certificate is what they called it at those days, and got a job eventually as a business development manager, if you like, or a sales engineer in that time, to look at building a business that was running. And it was through that experience that I really started to cotton on to the need for innovation. It was basically an SME business. It was a business that was very subjected to the flows of the economy and how we responded to that. So sell as hard as you like. If the market's not ready to buy, they're not going to buy. So that was kind of prompted me into innovation, and that prompted me to go into studying innovation entrepreneurship. And then I just got bitten by the education bug, learning bug, and just kept going from there. So I started with a master's, did my PhD, loved it, loved researching, loved sort of communicating to students, and went from there.
That's great. You have worked across the teaching dynamics and the research in university for several years, I think.
Yes.
Could you share some of the projects or themes you are currently exploring that are really exciting for you to get your hands dirty in it?
Okay, there are really 2 things that actually come to my palate at the moment in terms of what I'm doing. One is something I'm looking at the entrepreneurial ecosystems, and that's been a thread for my work for quite some time. And I've really concentrated on the theoretical end of this in terms of really trying to understand what is an ecosystem from an ecological perspective, because I'm really interested in the way that we use or can borrow from that kind of field to understand entrepreneurship differently. Okay. So that's been a major piece of work, and that's culminating into a book I'm working on at the moment, which is around advancing kind of research methods in this field. The other project is what we call Aspire 5.0. Which is really thinking about the collision between Industry 5.0 or Industry 4.0, you may have heard about, and how technologies are actually informing or using environmental and social and governance. How these 2 things are colliding and how that's actually changing the performance expectations of firms. So that's another major project I'm working on at the moment.
That's great. Looking at today's fast-changing startup ecosystem and then how the industry is evolving, after also working in these kind of projects so far, what kind of trends do you think that from an academic perspective, these kind of trends where students or early stage entrepreneurs can or should really pay attention to? Like, what is the academia's response in these kind of changes that are happening?
Good question. So what I've noticed over the last little while, and I'll develop on this, but the whole idea of a purpose economy, sort of what are we actually setting up to do and how we're achieving these things, That became a big thing a couple of years ago, sort of and I should say that when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking about from the ecosystem that I sit in, which is in Adelaide, South Australia, Australia. So from this perspective, the idea of what a purpose economy was and how people are setting up their ventures with purpose was really become a strong trend. Now, I think that's evolved a little bit more, and the whole notion of sustainability is evolving. So what I see is there's much more activity in new ventures which are responding to those sustainability challenges, which is really interesting. And if you delve into this area, you see some things, concepts like sufficiency. So what happens when you say to an entrepreneur, look, we're not looking to grow your venture, we're looking to sustain sufficient supply of what we already have.
Right.
Oh, that's quite a different way of thinking about it. But that doesn't mean you can't grow. It just means in the understanding of the market, the growth opportunities may not necessarily be adding more to the economy, more consumerism, more output which we get rid of, but how do we grow in the use of what we already have? So that whole change in business model and the kind of way we're thinking about businesses, I think that's one of the trends that I really pick up on. And it sort of stems from that idea of purpose. What are we actually trying to do?
Exactly. So within this entire thing, have you come across any kind of student-led ideas or ventures from your program that you've seen, they are integrating into this kind of industry?
That's interesting, because the examples that I've got, because sort of thinking around, what is the opportunities for students in their ventures, and how successful are they is a couple of things that I've been toying with in preparing for this interview. And so what I wanted to comment on today was the ventures, how long they take. So the idea of I teach a class this semester and they're a global success next year isn't really the case, right? So you kind of look, it is a long-term project. So if you look at unicorns, you're looking at a 10-year horizon in terms of, the time they start, the time they become a billion-dollar business. So you're kind of looking at those sorts of things. So the kinds of businesses that I've seen over the years have picked up on trends. And there's a couple of them, particularly around vehicle tracking, for instance, a company called Coda Wireless. And it was started at University of South Australia here out of the research that was done in 2004. But they were picking up a time when, GPS tracking and everything else was happening. They were able to ride this wave, and they've now become a well-established business here in South Australia. They do vehicle-to-vehicle tracking, vehicle-to-base tracking, vehicle-to-pedestrian tracking. They do a number of systems which actually have advanced from when they were first thinking about, oh, GPS, we can put this bit of tech in a car. So that kind of picking up on those trends are really important. But there's some other things as well. And the other type of venture I wanted to mention was something that was a bit more recent, but it's a different type of venture. And the way we learn entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily instantly accommodate these different types of ventures. So the other one I wanted to refer to is called Lift Cancer Care. Now, this was a student who came, a mature age student, who came into our program, our master's program, at my prior university. And this would have been about 2014-15. She's a physiotherapist. And what she paired up with, or who she paired up with, was a cancer specialist. And so what they created was a venture that was looked at physiotherapy for cancer patients. So how do we keep them active, stimulated, and that venture has been going gangbusters. So it's not always about the tech. It is really about the service that you're actually offering. What is the solution, and really sort of bringing that together.
It's really interesting to see how students have been, picking up the problem, observing the world with their POV, and then trying to bring the optimal solution to the market. It's really growing onto their skin at this point in time as we see
Mm.
and speak to global audience in this particular shift. Now, this we see that it's a growing shift towards entrepreneurship. What do you think is a very, kind of keen methodology where university or academics come into place in building and shaping up this kind of entrepreneurial mindset? Is it the curriculum or the experiences or the kind of initiatives university is doing? How does that play a role in shaping up?
Okay, that's interesting because what my area of interest is in the ecosystem, right? And universities have a big role to play in the ecosystem. And I talked about a venture that came from the research area versus a venture that came from a student. So the way universities operate, they can drive the ecosystem from both of those directions. And that's just talking about the business startup. But there's another aspect to this as well, and that is as an ecosystem, there's that entrepreneurial culture, that entrepreneurial acceptance of new ideas. That is something universities can also play to. They can actually, the way they teach, the way they approach their curriculum, it actually shapes the way people think. And so therefore they also shape the culture that the startups are in. Now, put those things together, you've got new ventures coming out, you've got a culture that's accepting of entrepreneurship, prepared to explore and experiment, accepting failure, etc. That creates a nice dynamic for entrepreneurship to blossom. Of course, you need other things. You need finance and skills and all kinds of other things, market demand and all kinds of things to actually make it work. So it's not a simple pattern. But the universities play a big role in that. And certainly my current role, because we are merging two universities, so my current role is really thinking about how do we bring some of that to the new university and embed it across the university. And we've got a number of things we're doing in terms of creating courses for whole university that actually play with entrepreneurship and design thinking as concepts, and starting to get people to think about what are you doing here and how are you going to make use of your degree, whether that be in a new venture or a new policy environment or a new social venture or program initiative. What are you trying to do? How are you being entrepreneurial with what it is that you do? So that's the kind of thing that universities do. We have other streams that actually focus on student startups and focus on research startups, but we're also trying to embed that culture.
That's great. That's really interesting because as I speak to a lot of universities, they have come up with different, as you spoke, that there are different kinds of programs that are coming up. We are trying to inculcate the mindset and how you can accept the entrepreneurship is something that is there in the market, and a lot of universities like yours is also adapting to it. So that's very exciting and very amazing thing that, to understand. Now, looking ahead, this is one question that I was very excited to ask you, that what do you think, and what advice would you give to students and probably the young entrepreneurs or the founders of future that are just getting started today in their journey? And what is it that university or your course or the other set of programs are offering them that they can look out for?
Okay, it's a changing world. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it's rapidly changing. The advent of AI, which is something which I think everyone needs to pay attention to, it is going to change the way we work. And there is a downside of that as well, because AI can also uses a lot of energy. So coming back to that sustainability question that I was raising before, these two things are interlinked, and the more we put use and practice into AI, the heavier the energy demand. So it's kind of an interesting mix to play with. But so I say that to sort of suggest, keep an eye out on trends. Where are we actually going? And for students coming through, that whole idea of be prepared, in terms of knowing what this is. I've seen too many entrepreneurs start ventures not being prepared, not knowing what they're getting into. And some of that can be scary, but it's good to be scared and know what you're actually going into so as you can mitigate for it. So being responsive and be prepared for what's going on. Be prepared to experiment in terms of, these technologies are coming out there. What does it mean for you? What kind of ventures can you create? Experiment at small scale so you can see and try different things. That's I think goes for any entrepreneur. And then practice, because it's you need to keep practicing this in terms of really knowing your stuff. And this is the risk of AI. We actually give AI to do too much for us, and therefore when we want to know the depth, we don't understand it very well. So this is where the education piece comes in. Really get to know what it is you're actually dealing with. Then hone your skills, so that using that practice to really hone your skills. What does it take? Keeping an eye on why you're doing this. Don't think about success in terms of global recognition. That's not the answer here. It is really, what's the problem I deal with? How do I solve that for customers, and will they pay for it? At the end of the day, they're the three things that really matter and sustain the business. And the last thing I'd say, team, don't try and do it by yourself. Sort of really bring people along with you and create ventures which have complementary skills. So they're the kinds of things I would ask or get people to think about. And the way we're approaching our programs, coming back to that, is along those dimensions. So we're really thinking about how do we get them to think and prepare? How do we get them to experiment? These are our students to experiment. How do we give them opportunities to hone their skills? And how do we give them opportunities to team? So as they can actually find their feet when they actually decide to start a venture, whenever that might be.
That's incredible, Allan. The thing that you have given so many of insights and key takeaways that I think all of us would take back a lot, and will definitely work on that. Thank you so much, Professor O'Connor. That was very thoughtful and engaging conversation with you. It's been incredibly insightful to hear how education, research, the ventures that students are getting started with, the real world entrepreneurship, how it is all coming together, not just here, not just there, but also at University of South Australia. That is a great conversation with you. And I'd like to also say for the audience, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back with more stories from the intersection of academia and entrepreneurship right here on School to Startup. Thank you, Allan. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.